Welcome aboard. Happy New Year. Do you know why I'm wishing you a Happy New Year on the 17th day? Because throughout this year, you've not got any blunt thoughts. But here I am serving you the first episode of Blunt Thoughts in 2025. And I've titled it, Taming Corruption, Stabilizing Our Power, and Saving the Economy. Mahama's signaling so far. Taming corruption, stabilizing our power, and saving the economy. Mahama's signaling so far. You see, agrobeswa, nefridain, and nopa. And that's why some of us have been watching keenly with eagle-eyed keenness about how he's gone about appointments or nominations so far. Up to this point, I doff my hat to the president. But the work is only just beginning. Which is why we're also going to look at one of the crucial promises he made, corruption. And why? Because if you go as far back as President go as far back as even President Rawlings. I want to stick to the Fourth Republic. Do you remember probity, accountability, and all of that? But at a point in time, what we saw was a far cry from the rhetoric. Now, President Mahama has also started talking about, in fact, not now, he's been talking about corruption in the campaign, leading to the elections, and he's continued talking about his commitment to fighting corruption. Recently, he said, we'll tackle corruption head on. That's what he said. We'll tackle corruption head on. And if you go to the manifesto of the NDC, what were some of the things they spoke about? Launch Operation Recover All Loot. Oral. Well, oral is oraling so far. We'll leave it at that, right? All the push and shove and the minority has said, well, boycott it, but I've always said, say, obika se obeto wabo, say obeto wabo, not just saying, so. If you know you've done nothing, why the fear? Relax. But oral, an inquiry into looted state lands. Now, all jokes aside, this is a crucial issue. How some political entities, how some individuals have handled land. I mean, even parks and gardens land, in some cases, like being encroached upon, being taken by individuals. I remember the ecological group, Madam Awule's group, Eco-Conscious Citizens, having to bring to the fore some of these issues. Why? So these issues must be tackled. Conflict of interest legislation for public officials. I feel this is crucial because once you are politically exposed like that, some things, whether it's the V8 or any state vehicles or land, you shouldn't be found engaging in some of those unless there are legal channels for doing so. Set up an independent value for money office. Of course, we know public procurement is one of the places where we bleed the most as a country. And so this would definitely be a step in the right direction. Review the Public Procurement Act, tied to that. So these are some of the promises made. At least oral is oraling. Let's see how things go in that regard. But then the president has also said, if you are among those submitting CVs, beware that this will not be an easy task. It certainly won't be business as usual. So if you're thinking of coming through to make the most of the situation, siphon state resources, the president is saying, you may be in for a shock. But let's see whether words will match action. Next slide. He also says any persons who find themselves appointed to public office have to be made aware that they would be held to the highest ethical and professional standards. Here, I just want to take, because in private enterprise, and that's why some people often say that what applies in private enterprise should, to a large extent, apply in public enterprise, because that way, the ethics, the mores, the professionalism, if you translate that into public enterprise, will be far better off. But so far, those who have been nominated, they appear to reflect this. The problem usually isn't about the start. It's about how it continues. Will they be able to continue ethically, professionally, raising the bar, not just setting the bar, raising the bar? Again, it's early days. Time will tell. And then you go to oral itself, because we are talking about, the first bit about Blunt Thoughts today is dealing with corruption, right? We are still compiling all the cases and we'll be presenting our report to the president soon. So far, the petitions we have received exceed 700. Wow. It has been a daunting task, but there is strong political will and commitment to this cause. I want to see every last one of those 700 once there is adequate evidence backing them coming to the fore. I feel it's the only way we can signal to people that if you do the wrong thing, very likely the consequence will not be favorable for you. And if you don't want that unfavorable consequence, then, or unfavorable outcome, then don't do this one. That's one of the ways. After all, the law, one of the crucial reasons we have law, is to serve as a deterrent. So you know, if you kill this and you are caught, this is likely the consequence. Next slide. But it becomes even more interesting when you put all of it into perspective. How much do we lose to corruption every year? This is a conservative figure because this is all the way from, look at that, Ghana Integrity Initiative 2019. We're in 2025. Some figures put it at twice this value. Imagine losing $6 billion to corruption. Just imagine it. The IMF is giving us $3 billion. Multiply that by 2. That's how much we are likely losing to corruption. If we dealt with that, dealt with some of the issues that the Auditor General is often dealing with, don't you think Ghana would be a much better place? And you see, if you leave a human being, taxes, go even to the West, if you give room, people will not pay taxes. But the systems are such that you can't afford not to because of the consequences. Let's make corruption so unattractive that even if you wanted to do it, you wouldn't be able to do it. But it gets even more interesting. Next slide. When you go to our energy sector, the second belt of my conversation, because if you look at the debts there, it stands at 3 billion. And if you look at the devaluation of the cedi, we are talking 45 billion Ghana cedis plus. Next slide. Now, what is the signaling from the energy minister designate? He says on privatization, it's crucial because look, whether privatization or no privatization or some privatization, we have to talk about it because in the end, it will impact us. Do you remember when PDS came? So we must talk about it. We believe there should be private sector participation. Give or take, within this year, we should complete the framework. 2025 is what he's talking about. Next slide. And by the way, next slide. Let me just mention that he's one of the appointees so far who have impressed me the most in terms of his knowledge about his sector. On ECG privatization, Oliver Barker-Vormawor says, if none of our governments can achieve efficiency in managing ECG so that it remains a publicly owned social good, should our governments have any business governing us? Let's privatize government then. I say sell government to the Chinese. Of course, I feel this was way below the belt. But that's his thinking, that if you can govern without ensuring that an entity like ECG, look, electricity, water, these are not things you play around with. If you can't handle them well so that they can serve us, and we always get to this point, then are you governing for real? But let's look at other thoughts on it. On ECG's profitability, before I even get to that, it's interesting because if you look at 2012, we're bleeding, we're in deficit, ECG, 136 million. It would go to 246 million, 291 million in 2015, 209 million in 2016, and then look at that, 497 million in 2017, 2.2 billion in the negative, in the red, not in the black, in the red in 2018, 1.46 billion, 410 million in the black. That was a good outturn between 2020 and 2021. But look at where we are now. 10.2 billion in 2023. That's how bad it became. Next slide. So it tells you that ECG itself is bleeding, hemorrhaging badly. And that's a major cause of where we find ourselves. But then if you look at ECG validation reports, because why are we talking about it? Revenue collection. The difference between what they have been declaring in the cash waterfall mechanism, at least for the IPPs and others providing power, and what they have been collecting. There's a problem there. 1.14 billion is what we are talking about if you're looking at quarter 4 of 2023. 1.14 billion. You go to the next slide, and you would see, again, difference between CWM reports and ECG revenue sheets. Quarter 4 of 2023, 600 million Ghana cedis. What is happening? Next slide. Then you look at underdeclared revenue, quarter 4 of 2023. So ECG reported 3.38 billion. PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, validated report confirmed 3.87 billion. That leaves you with some 400 million. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we'll try to get the slides back. Yes, let's go to the next slide. That leaves you with revenue not captured, 490 million Ghana cedis. Next slide. Then you look at fuel supply payment discrepancies. ECG recording 136 plus million, and the CWM declaration 18.2 million. Look at the difference. 136 plus million, 18.2 million. What exactly is happening? There are discrepancies that ought to be addressed. But, next slide. You look at the ECG Validation Report and the bank accounts. Now, ECG operates 84 bank accounts across 20 different banks. Next slide. 84, keep that in mind. We also know that per the IMF and dealings that we've had, even the central bank, they have been told to operate a certain number, fixed number. Then you come to the comments by former ECG MD, my good friend Samuel Dubik Mahama. He says, under declaration is not a criminal offense. That's what he's saying. Next slide. Now, if you look deeper, he says those 84 bank accounts do collect for ECG nationwide, but they settle in one bank account. If we even do a single bank account, that is a concentration risk. Nobody operates a business like that, and that's his justification. What do you think? Next slide. But then when you look at this, 5.1 billion being grants to ECG, that's according to SIGA. That's how much we are also giving ECG to lend a push to our power. Is it commensurable with what we are getting? That's the question. That's where the devil is. Next slide. Then you look at, and here's where I'm ending on the economy, right? You look at the monthly inflationary rates, 2008 to 2024. I'll not go through all of it. But if you look at the trend all the way to the high in 2023 or 2022 to 2023, and then where we are now in 2024, it's still a far cry from the 8% or so that Dr. Cassiel-Ato-Forson is targeting. And we're getting to the end. Let me go to the next slide. Now, if you look at the finance minister designate and what he's been signaling, saying, some industry watchers say it's not easy, but it can be done. If we introduce strong measures, particularly on the expenditure side, we will be able to reduce inflation to 8% plus or minus 2. 8% plus or minus 2, so 10% or 6%. And then let's go to the next slide. Taxes to be scrapped. He's saying all of this, but are they achievable? COVID-19 levy is giving you 13.91 billion Ghana cedis. E-levy, 8.27. You are taking this off, you are taking that off, you are taking off the betting tax of 5.1 billion. Cumulatively, you are looking at something around 26 plus billion, 27 billion. How will you do it? Again, for now, we'll be cautious. Time will tell. And then we'll do the final slide, though, because he is looking at road tolls as well. And this is where sometimes you say, hey, Ato. It was interesting for me listening to him before the appointments committee because, look, let's face it, Ato-Forson, fantastic gentleman. He knows his stuff, but you have to stick to what you say. In 2021, Dr. Cassiel-Ato-Forson said, I've always said that road tolls out there should be removed because the amount of money in terms of fuel that we burn in the traffic as against the revenue the government gets, I don't think it's worthwhile. And he had interactions with my very own colleague who celebrates his birthday today, Evans Mensah, right? But then in 2025, in front of the appointments committee, hey, Ato, you could tell in your market, if you use the road, you have to pay a toll, and it's all over the world. Ghana won't be the first country, it won't be the last one. We have to contribute towards the road maintenance. You cannot fault him much, but you can fault him on the point of candidness. There's a shift in position. They say only a fool never changes his mind. But we'll be watching. We'll be analyzing. And we shall follow every little bit, Dr. Cassiel-Ato-Forson. These are my blunt thoughts for you, shared raw, hot, unedited, undiluted. It's another season to be a blessing. So thank you for blessing me by watching. We'll be right back with more action. Stay.